Hello friends, welcome to tutorial in English literature. In today's lesson, I shall discuss the plot of Book 1 of Jonathan Swift's masterpiece Gulliver's Travels. Before proceeding further, I want to ask a question. The question is, who is the fictional editor and author of the prefatory note to Gulliver's Travels? These are your options. Try to answer the question in the comment section. Let's begin our discussion with the characters that we find in the first book. Lemuel Gulliver's story begins much like other travel records of his time. He begins with the story of his life. He is born to a family in Nottinghamshire in England. He was the third of the five sons. Although he studies at Cambridge as a teenager, his family is too poor to keep him there. So he is sent to London to be an apprentice of a surgeon named James Bates. Gulliver also spends a lot of time studying math and navigation because he wants to travel. When his apprenticeship ends, he also studies physics at Leiden, a city in Holland, because he thought it would be useful in long voyages. When Gulliver returns to England, Mr. Bates helps Gulliver to join the crew of the ship, the Swallow, as a surgeon. Gulliver travels for 3 years on the Swallow and gets as far as the Levant, also known as the eastern portion of the Mediterranean. He comes back to London and he settles in London, working as a doctor, and marries a woman named Mary Barton. His business begins to fail when his patron Mr. Bates dies. So again he serves as the surgeon to two ships for 6 years and travels the Far East and West Indies. He spends a lot of time reading while he is at sea. When Gulliver is ashore, he enjoys observing the customs of the people he meets. But even the sea starts to lose its interest for Gulliver and he decides to return home. Gulliver moves his business to various parts of London, but he continues to fail at making a living. Therefore, he decides to accept one last job on a ship called the Antelope in 1699. He sets sail with Captain William Pritchard on the Antelope, heading to the South Seas. The Antelope encounters a violent storm in the East Indies, northwest of Van Diemen's Land, what we now call Tasmania, an area in the southeast of Australia. 12 crewmen die in the storm. 6 of the crew members, including Gulliver, board a small rowboat to escape. Soon the rowboat capsizes and Gulliver loses track of his companions. They are never seen again. Gulliver, however, swims safely to shore. Gulliver lies down on the grass to rest and soon he falls asleep. When he wakes up, he finds that his arms, legs and long hair have been tied to the ground with pieces of thread. He can only look up and the bright sun prevents him from seeing anything. He feels something moves across his legs and over his chest. He looks down and sees, to his surprise, a 6-inch tall human carrying a bow and arrow. At least 40 more little people climb onto his body. He is surprised and shouts loudly, frightening the little people away. However, they return soon. Gulliver breaks the strings binding his left arm. He loosens the ropes, tying his hair so he can turn to the left. In response, the little people shoot a shower of arrows into his hand and violently attack his body and face. He decides that the safest thing to do is to lie still until nightfall. The noise increases as the little people build a stage next to Gulliver, about a foot and a half off the ground. One of them climbs into it and makes a speech in a language that Gulliver does not understand. Gulliver indicates that he is hungry, and the little people brings him breakfast of meat. He devours it all and then shows that he is thirsty, so they bring him 2 large barrels of wine. Gulliver wants to pick up 40 or 50 of the little people and throw them against the ground, but he is grateful to them for their hospitality. The little people also treat Gulliver's tiny arrow wounds. Their bravery astonishes Gulliver as they climb onto his body despite his great size. An official tells him that he is to be carried to the capital city. Gulliver wants to walk, but he is not permitted. Instead, they bring a frame of wood raised 3 inches off the ground and carried by 22 wheels. 1,500 of the emperor's horses, all of which are about 4.5 inches high, drag Gulliver to the capital city. After he awakens, Gulliver finds that he is chained by his leg to an old temple. It is no longer in use for religious purposes because a murder was once committed there. The building probably represents Westminster Hall, where Charles I was tried and sentenced to death by the Puritans in 1649. They gave him only enough freedom to walk around the building and lie down inside the temple. More than 100,000 Lilliputians come out to see Gulliver. When Gulliver stands up the next morning, he sees the entire countryside, which he discovers is beautiful and rustic. The tallest trees are 7 feet tall, and the whole area looks to him like a theatre set. The emperor visits on horseback from his tower. He orders his servants to give Gulliver food and drink. Gulliver then describes the emperor. He is a tiny bit taller than anyone else around him. He is around 28 and he has been emperor for 7 years. He and Gulliver converse, though they cannot understand each other. Gulliver tries to speak every language he knows, but nothing works. After 2 hours, Gulliver is left with a group of soldiers guarding him and a huge crowd that has gathered around him in curiosity. Some of them, disobeying orders, try to shoot arrows at him. As a punishment, the brigadier ties up 6 of these offenders and places them in Gulliver's hand. Gulliver puts 5 of them into his pocket and pretends that he is going to eat the 6th, but then cuts loose his ropes and sets him free. He does the same with the other 5, which pleases the court. Gulliver spends about 2 weeks sleeping on the floor of the temple. Then a bed is made for Gulliver by joining 600 small beds. Meanwhile, the government tries to decide what to do with him. Ministers are concerned that he will break loose or he will eat enough to cause a famine. Some suggest that they starve him or kill him, but others argue that Gulliver's giant corpse will cause a large health risk. Officers who witnessed Gulliver's kind treatment of the 6 offending people report to the council, and the emperor and his court decide to treat Gulliver with kindness. They arrange to deliver large amounts of food to Gulliver every morning. The emperor orders 600 people to serve Gulliver, 300 tailors to make him a suit, and 6 scholars to teach Gulliver their language. Every morning, Gulliver asks the emperor to set him free, but the emperor refuses. The emperor also orders to search him. Gulliver agrees to this search, and the Lilliputian takes account of his possessions: handkerchief, snuff, comb, razor, knife, journal, and pocket watch. All these relatively common objects appear to them unfamiliar. For example, a comb is described as a sort of engine, from the back of which were extended 20 long poles. In the process, all of his weapons are taken away. Here Swift is satirizing the evidence presented against the Tory leaders Harley and Bolingbroke in 1715. Certain Whig commissioners did their best to twist letters and books of the accused into treasonable meanings. The chapter 3 begins with the emperor's wish to entertain Gulliver with shows. The main show is a kind of rope dancing, which is performed only by people who hold high office in Lilliput. For the performance, which is a kind of competitive entrance examination, the candidates dance on ropes suspended 2 feet above the ground. When a vacancy occurs, candidates appeal the emperor to entertain him with a dance, and whoever jumps the highest earns the office. The current ministers continue this practice as well, in order to show that they have not lost their skill. Clearly, Swift intends for us to understand this episode as a satire of England's system of political appointments. Gulliver, however, never suggests that he finds the Lilliputians ridiculous. As another diversion for Gulliver, the emperor lays three silken threads of different colors on a table. He then holds out a stick and candidates are asked to leap over it or crawl under it. Whoever shows the most dexterity wins one of the ribbons. Gulliver builds a platform from twigs and his handkerchief and invites 24 horsemen to exercise upon it. The emperor greatly enjoys watching this new entertainment, but it is cut short when a horse steps through the handkerchief. Some Lilliputians discover Gulliver's hat, which washed ashore after him, and he asks them to bring it back. Soon after, the emperor asks Gulliver to pose like a colossus or giant statue so that his troops might march under Gulliver. The whole court agrees finally that Gulliver should be released, except Skyres Bolgolam. Bolgolam at last agrees, but only if Bolgolam can decide the condition for Gulliver's freedom. The contract for Gulliver's freedom has the following rules. First, Gulliver won't leave Lilliput or come to the main city without permission. Second, the Man Mountain, as they continue to call him, will only walk on the kingdom's main roads and will not lie down in any meadows or fields. Third, he will be careful not to stomp on anyone or pick them up without their consent. Fourth, once a month Gulliver will have to carry the emperor's messenger and his horse to his destination and back again. Fifth, Gulliver will defend Lilliput against their enemy, the island of Blefuscu. Sixth, he will help workmen to build walls and royal buildings and to calculate how big the island of Lilliput is. Seventh, if Gulliver observes all of these rules, the emperor will provide Gulliver with food, drink, and Gulliver will get to spend as much time as he wants with the emperor. Gulliver agrees to all of these rules, even though each article emphasizes the fact that Gulliver is so powerful that he could violate all of the articles easily. The emperor permits Gulliver to go free, and his chains are unlocked at last. In the fourth chapter, we find that after regaining his freedom, Gulliver goes to Mildendo, the capital city of the Lilliputians. The residents are told to stay indoors and they all sit on their roofs and in their garret windows to see him. The town is 500 feet square with a wall surrounding it and can hold 5 lakh people. The emperor wants Gulliver to see the magnificence of his palace, which is at the center of the city. So Gulliver cuts down trees to make himself a stool, which he carries around with him so that he can sit down and see things from a shorter distance. After 2 weeks, a government official, Reldresel, comes to see him. He tells Gulliver that two forces, one rebel group and one foreign empire, threaten the kingdom. The rebel group exists because the kingdom is divided into two sections called Tramexan and Slamexan. The people in the two factions are distinguished by their heights of the hills. The two parties hate each other so much that they can't eat, drink or talk to each other. Reldresal tells Gulliver that the current emperor has chosen to employ primarily the low-hilled Slamexan in his administration. He adds that the emperor himself has lower hills than all of his officials, but his son, the heir to the throne, seems less decided. One of his hills is high and the other low, which makes it tough for him to walk around. Not only is Lilliput divided inside, but the Lilliputians also fear an invasion from the island of Blefuscu, which Reldresal calls the other great empire of the universe. Blefuscu is divided from Lilliput by a small channel about 800 yards wide, not even half a mile. Reldresal describes the history of the two nations. The conflict between them, he tells Gulliver, began years ago, when the grandfather of the current emperor commanded all Lilliputians to break their eggs on the small end. He made this decision after breaking an egg in the old way, large end first, and cutting his finger. The people resented the law, and 6 rebellions were started in protest. 11,000 people chose death rather than submit to the law. Many books were written on the controversy, but books written by the big Indians were banned in Lilliput. The monarchs of Blefuscu fueled these rebellions, and when they were defeated, the rebels fled to that country to seek refuge. The government of Blefuscu accused the Lilliputians of disobeying their religious doctrine, the Brandrekral, by breaking their eggs at the small end. The Lilliputians argued that the doctrine reads that all true believers shall break their eggs at the convenient end, which could be interpreted as the small end. Reldresal continues that the exiled Big Indians gained support in Blefuscu to launch a war against Lilliput. They were also aided by rebel forces inside Lilliput. A war has been raging between the two nations ever since, and Gulliver is asked to help to defend Lilliput against its enemies. Gulliver does not feel that it is appropriate to intervene, but he nonetheless offers his services to the emperor. In the 5th chapter, Gulliver spies on the empire of Blefuscu and devises a plan. He asks for cables and bars of iron, out of which he makes hooks with cables attached. He then wades and swims the channel to Blefuscu and catches their ships at port, of which there are about 50. The people are so frightened that they leap out of their ships and swim to shore. Gulliver attaches a hook to each ship and ties them together. The Blefuscu soldiers fire arrows at him, but he keeps working, protecting his eyes by putting on a pair of glasses he keeps in his coat pocket. He tries to pull the ships away, but they are anchored too tightly, so he cuts them away with pocket knife and pulls the ships back to Lilliput. In Lilliput, Gulliver is greeted as a hero. The emperor declares him a Nardak, the highest title of honor. The emperor wants to use his military advantage to conquer Blefuscu and make it a province in his empire and to destroy all big Indians forever. Gulliver dissuades him from this action and refuses to be a part of any plan that will make free people slaves. The emperor eventually gives up his plan, but he never forgives Gulliver for refusing to help him enslave Blefuscu. 3 weeks later, a delegation arrives from Blefuscu, and the war ends with Blefuscu's surrender. The Blefuscu delegates also ask Gulliver to visit their kingdom. He wishes to do so, and the emperor reluctantly allows it. Skyres Bolgolam, that is Gulliver's enemy at court, and Flimnap, the treasurer of the country, both use Gulliver's desire to visit Blefuscu as evidence against his loyalty to Lilliput. As a Nardak or person of high rank, Gulliver no longer has to perform all the duties laid down in his contract. He, however, helps the Lilliputians when the queen's room in the palace catches fire. He forgets his coat and cannot put the flames out with his clothing, so he urinates on the palace, putting out the fire entirely. Though he has saved the palace, Gulliver knows that he has also broken law by urinating in the palace. He is told that the emperor has pardoned him. However, the queen is horribly offended and refuses to see that part of the palace again. In the 6th chapter, Gulliver describes the general customs and practices of Lilliput in more detail. He begins by explaining that everything in Lilliput, their animals, trees and plants, is as tiny as the Lilliputians. Their eyesight is also adapted to their size. Gulliver cannot see as clearly and closely as they can, while they cannot see as far as he can. The Lilliputians are well educated, but their writing system is odd to Gulliver. They write not left to right, like the Europeans, or right to left, like the Arabic, or top to bottom, like the Chinese, but from one corner of the page to the other, like the ladies in England. The dead are buried with their heads pointing directly downward, because the Lilliputians believe that eventually the dead will rise again, and the earth, which they think is flat, will turn upside down. Gulliver adds that the better educated Lilliputians no longer believe in this custom. Gulliver describes some of the other laws of Lilliput, such as if someone accuses someone else of crimes against the state, these charges are taken very seriously. On the other hand, if it turns out that the accused person is innocent, Then the accuser is executed and the accused person gets a money reward from the emperor. In fact, lying and fraud are considered worse than theft because honest people are more vulnerable to liars than to thieves. They prefer to appoint guys who are good but dumb over those who are smart but bad. Gulliver points out that the criminal justice system in Lilliput is not totally based on punishment. If anyone do not do anything wrong for 73 months, he gets a cash reward from the emperor. The Lilliputians believe that men and women come together to have children out of natural instinct. So kids don't owe their parents anything. They have big public nurseries for both boys and girls. These nurseries teach kids the skills they will need for their particular place in life, as decided by their parents' social position and their own interests. Only the laborers' children stay at home, since their job is to farm. There are no beggars at all, since the poor are well looked after. Gulliver lives in Lilliput for 9 months and 13 days. During this time, he makes his own table and chair. 200 tailors sew him a shirt and 300 cooks prepare him 2 dishes every day. The emperor visits Gulliver's home for dinner, along with his wife, children, and Flimnap, the treasurer. Gulliver notices that Flimnap keeps looking at him with a frown on his face. Flimnap, like Skyres Bolgolam, is a secret enemy of Gulliver. Flimnap used this visit to Gulliver's house to point out to the emperor that Gulliver eats a huge amount and that the emperor's cash stores are starting to get low as a result. One reason that Flimnap hates Gulliver is that there are rumors going around that Flimnap's wife is having an affair with Gulliver. Gulliver protests a lot that there is absolutely no truth to this accusation. Flimnap eventually makes up with his wife but never forgives Gulliver. In the 7th chapter, we find that for 2 months before Gulliver leaves Lilliput, there has been a plot building against him. While he prepares to make his trip to Blefuscu, one of his friends at court comes by in the dead of night to warn him that he has been charged with treason by Skyres Bolgolam, the admiral, Flimnap, the treasurer, Limtok, the general, Lalcon, the chamberlain, and Balmuff, the chief justice, have issued articles of impeachment for treason against Gulliver. Gulliver is accused of treason for urinating within the royal palace, refusing to destroy the remaining Blefuscu ship and to reduce Blefuscu to a province of Lilliput, helping the ambassadors from Blefuscu when they came to ask for peace, and planning to visit Blefuscu even though Lilliput is at war with Blefuscu. Gulliver is told that Reldresal has asked for his sentence to be reduced. He suggested to put his eyes out instead of killing him. That way Gulliver would still be able to help the emperors with his great strength. The whole council is outraged at this suggestion because Gulliver's strength is exactly the problem. Bolgolam warns that Gulliver might flood the whole country with his urine or carry the Blefuscudian fleet back to Blefuscu if he wanted to. Flimnap tells the emperor that Gulliver has to die because the cost of feeding him will bankrupt Lilliput. So Reldresal suggests that they stop feeding Gulliver. That way they would save money. What is more, Gulliver's crops would be relatively skinny, making it easier to get rid of. Everyone agrees on this compromise. They plan to starve him and to blind him. The official tells Gulliver that the operation to blind him will take place in 3 days. Gulliver considers to appeal for lesser punishment, but with so many powerful enemies, he perceives that won't work. Gulliver also thinks about destroying the capital city by throwing stones at it, but he rejects that idea because he took an oath to the emperor to be loyal. Finally, Gulliver decides to run away. He walks across the channel to Blefuscu. Gulliver does not tell the emperor of Blefuscu that he has fallen out of favor in Lilliput. In the next chapter, we find that 3 days later, Gulliver sees a boat overturned in the water. The boat is big enough to carry him. He asks the emperor of Blefuscu to help him to fix it. At the same time, the emperor of Lilliput sends a message demanding that Gulliver to be returned so that his sentence can be carried out. The Emperor of Blefuscu sends it back with the message that Gulliver will soon be leaving both their kingdoms. After about a month, the boat is ready, and Gulliver sets sail and is picked up by an English merchant ship and returned to England, where he makes a good profit showing miniature farm animals that he carried away from Blefuscu in his pockets. Now let's get back to the question. The correct answer is Richard Simpson. He is Gulliver's cousin and friend and also his editor. He is the fictional author of the prefatory note to Gulliver's Travels entitled The Publisher to the Readers. In this note, he justifies the elimination of nearly half of the original manuscript material on the grounds that it was irrelevant. That's all for today. Thank you for listening.